Well, hello, good morning and welcome. Welcome to this first ever Bath Live Presents. I'll explain that in a moment. My name is Greg Ingham. I'm from Media Clash, so Bath Live, and absolutely delighted to welcome you here this morning. There's been talk of Zoom fatigue, but this is our biggest ever webinar. We've got nearly 80 or so signed up now. More will join us during the session, and we're really looking forward to this exploration. It comes at a time just as we're getting used to one new reality. It does look as though another might well be looming. There's announcements due this week from the government. We'll see. Still, take the positive. I guess we're all more experienced now. So there's that. And Bath has proved to have continually low levels of corona problems and to be a very resilient place in virtually all respects. On we go. Today we have a fascinating session exploring personal values and changes, the all but diametric shift from investment banking to teaching, and how schools have attempted to navigate these times. It's the first of these Bath Live Presents, where we'll explore consumer-facing organisations and businesses and how they're having to adapt their offer to these times. Similar to our business surgeries, but all about the consumers and what these companies, these organisations, charities, and so on are doing differently. Quick updates for you before we start. Bath Property Awards, the nominations are now open, and there are a few remaining sponsorships available. The awards themselves are on Jan 22nd. Bath Life Awards, the nominations will open in November, and there are one or two sponsorships remaining, and those awards are on February 25th. In both cases, the opportunity to bring people together is such a vital role, particularly in these times. So we're really looking forward to those. And of course, Bath Life itself is fully back in the swing. The third issue back is due on Friday, will be out this Friday. Thank you, all of you, for your support, whether editorially or commercially, so that we can help celebrate this city and triumph its greatness issue in, issue out. We are determined to play our part in helping highlight the good that there is in this city. And gosh, there's just multiple good in this city. Let's come on to Kingswood. If I could ask Andrew to step forward, and we'll have a conversation.
Good morning, Greg. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Andrew. So it's with some trepidation I'm stepping into the headmaster's study. In my day, it was either some admonition I'd have, or even something much worse than that in headmasters. Today isn't going to be like that, though, is it?
No. I'm a pretty friendly headmaster.
So, pretty friendly headmaster. Let's talk a little bit about your backstory and then into your personal values and so on. It may be discernible, even in a couple of words, that you have something of a South African connection. Perhaps tell us how and when you came to the UK, what brought you over and what you were doing at that point.
Yeah, well, I'll try and give you the short story, Greg. I came over to the UK for a couple of years in the early 90s. I did a postgrad degree at Oxford, and I met Harriet during that time. And Harriet is English, and she's now my wife of 23 years, I guess. And so when we got married, I guess I lost the argument about where we'd live. And we were in South Africa at the time. And we decided as a kind of young married couple to do the London thing. And I left Deloitte in Joburg, where I was working as a management consultant. And I joined UBS in the City of London as a banker. And there's a long story between then and now, but that's how I got to be in the UK, and we've been here since April '97.
So you were in the world of investment banking in the boom time of the late '90s. Particularly the tech and media sector was exploding at that point. Quite dissimilar from teaching. If you were to do a very sort of brief compare and contrast between, I don't know, the cultural values, how you approached your role then to how you approach your role now?
So that's a big question. On one level, actually, when I was a banker, I was an equity analyst. So my job, if you like, was to analyze companies, to build models, to come up with investment recommendations. And then I would go and kind of pitch my story to institutional investors all over the world. And actually, there's not such a big leap from pitching an investment idea to a fund manager to actually teaching a class of sixth formers the kind of rudiments of economics. So, on one level, the kind of skills that I'd learned in the city, I could transfer directly into the classroom. The values question is really interesting, because I think one of my criticisms, I suppose, of the city was it's a place where the only way you can, well, they can tell you that they value you in the city is by how much they pay you. Whereas that's not what goes on in schools, as you can imagine. And I think one of the things that kind of drove me away from the city was actually a desire to be in a situation where I was making more of a kind of impactful difference on people's lives, I think, which I didn't necessarily feel I was doing in the city.
Did you, from a personal point of view, was this a growing sense, and I'm using words you didn't, but a growing sense of perhaps dissatisfaction with where you were, which then became the teaching decision, or was there more like a light bulb moment, a triggering event?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say a growing dissatisfaction. I really enjoyed my time in the city. It was fun. It was thrilling. It was, you know, surrounded by kind of dynamic young people. They probably paid me a bit more than I deserved. So all of those were good. But I think from very early on, actually, in my banking days, I realized that it wasn't going to be a career for life. That there was going to come a point when I needed to get out. And I think probably what triggered that, in fact, was 2002 was the birth of my first child, Charlotte. And I was working insane hours in the city, and I just thought, you know, I can't keep doing this. I left home before everyone woke up. I got back home after everyone was in bed, and I thought, I'm not doing this as a kind of family situation for any longer than I have to. And so there was that kind of impetus, if you like, which was saying, you need to figure out what you're going to do next, Andrew. And I think I probably had a bit of a light bulb moment, to use your phrase, that, and a lot of people have asked me, how did you go from being a banker to being a teacher? What was the trigger? And I think there were a number of things, but I think probably, I'd done a lot of rowing in my time, and rowing changed my life in many meaningful ways, and I can sort of tell you about that. But I'd always fancied my chances as a rowing coach. When I stopped rowing competitively, I thought, wouldn't it be lovely to go back and coach youngsters and kind of teach them some of the stuff that I'd learned. And I think that kind of, that seed which was sown, it wasn't a big leap to think, well, maybe I should go and teach, and maybe I should go and teach at a school where I could also coach rowing. And the more I looked into it, actually, the more I realized that it was going to be the perfect thing for me to do. And I did, and I haven't looked back.
Well, the COD psychologist in me was pondering, given your chronology, whether or not 9/11 in September 2001 was some sort of triggering point, that it prompted a change. I think it prompted for many people around that time a sense of, frankly, existential threat. And in some ways, that's elements of what's been happening in this great pause. People have been thinking very deeply about why they do what they do. Do you buy that at all, or is that just, yeah, my COD psychology?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good question, actually. I don't think 9/11 had an impact on me in terms of thinking, actually, I need to be in a different place, in a different industry. I do absolutely remember exactly where I was in my office in JP Morgan when 9/11 happened. It was one of those moments where kind of if you ask anyone, I guess, they'll say, yeah, when the planes crashed into those towers, this is where I was. And I remember that deeply because I was absolutely impacted by that. But I don't think that was a kind of trigger in terms of getting my decision to get out of the city.
And is it right that you were actually due to be in the Twin Towers on the day of September 11th?
Well, I mean, that's a kind of, yeah, that gives me kind of cold shivers, really. There was a seminar on the 101st floor of one of the the Twin Towers on the day of 9/11, and I toyed with whether I should go over to New York from London to attend that seminar. It was kind of broadly relevant to the media sector, which is what I was studying. And I phoned the conference organizers, and they said, well, look, you know, I wouldn't fly over from London. You could if you wanted to, but we'll give you the kind of presentation pack, and so no need to come over. And actually, it was only maybe a few days after 9/11 where I realized that, in fact, the seminar that I was potentially due to go to was on 9/11, and that everyone who'd been to that seminar, in fact, lost their life. And that was a kind of one of those moments where, you know, there, but for the grace of God, really.
Yeah, these these terrible times do shape us one way or another, directly or indirectly, and we're all being shaped by this great pause. If I may say to those watching, if you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. We have had quite a few questions in advance, which I'll try and take during this session, and I'll be bringing in 2, maybe 3 of our speakers to ask their questions live. So please avail yourselves of that. Let's come on to Kingswood. I'd like to discuss the school, its values, and then perhaps more broadly into education. And the timing of your engagement at Kingswood was difficult in 2 respects, I'd suggest. One, joining any organisation in lockdown must have been tough. You joined just before the A-levels were announced, and we know what problems that caused. So you just talk us through your summer. You joined at beginning of or middle of August?
Yeah, well, my official start date at Kingswood was the 1st of September. I mean, but in reality, when you're taking over a school, there's a kind of transition arrangement where you turn up and my predecessor Simon left, and likewise for what was going on at Truro School, where I was the head before, and so we moved into Bath on the 10th of August, which was A-level results week, and I'd agreed with my kind of predecessor and successor that I would do the A-level results at Truro, and Simon Morris would do the A-level results at Kingswood. And then we'd switch when it came to GCSEs, and that was going to be my first official duty at Kingswood. So, but because I was here and basically I had my feet under the desk, there was a moment where I felt I was kind of trying to do 2 jobs, which was a little bit stressful. But yeah, so a crazy time for A-level results because, and that was before the government had done its U-turn on allowing centre-assessed grades. So I think in both Kingswood and Truro School's situation, the government algorithms had significantly cut the number of results for a whole raft of students, which we felt was kind of distinctly unfair. So there was a period of about a week, which was really stressful, where I spent a lot of time writing letters to admissions tutors at universities, advocating on behalf of students who'd missed a grade and therefore lost out on their place. And then the U-turn happened, and that all kind of overnight was made better, if you like, but it was an interesting time for sure.
Interesting time. That's such a euphemism, sir. I'm sure it must have been a very pressured time. I want to come 2 time horizons. One immediately prior, and I'll ask the question in a moment, but the post point. Now that the decision was taken, the U-turn, as you say, to use centre-assessed grades, essentially the teachers, I guess, what has it meant for Kingswood students, that cohort who took their A-levels or would have taken their A-levels this summer, in terms of the unis which they intended or wished to go to?
I mean, actually, Greg, the picture at Kingswood is really, really positive, and I can say that because it had nothing to do with me. I think in the end, 83% of the Kingswood students who applied through UCAS got into their first choice university, and over 90% got into their first or insurance choice. So those are remarkable statistics in terms of students getting on into places of their choice. So I think in the end, post U-turn, we were really pleased with the destination of our students and the fact that in such large number they got into the places where they wanted to go.
So my pre-question is this. You imagine, if it's not too big a leap for you, that you were Gavin Williamson over the spring and summer as Education Minister. You were faced with either go with the algorithm route, which, had they looked into it, would have brought out the inequalities and variances which you've cited, or go the teacher-assessed route, which on the whole tends to inflate the grades compared to the reality, given that exams couldn't happen. Which route do you think, with a blank sheet of paper, would have been the better route?
Look, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and I'm probably glad I wasn't the education secretary, but what are my thoughts on that? I think, I'll give you an example of where the algorithm went wrong for one of my students at Truro School. The maths department assessed this boy that he was deserving of a C grade in maths. And we did it really, really rigorously. So we genuinely thought that was the result he would have got had he sat the exam on the day. And the algorithm gave him a U. So it was a 4-grade swing in terms of what we'd assessed him and what came back. And what the algorithm had done is that it had looked at the history of results and said, actually, there was someone at Truro School over the last couple of years who did get a U. There's a backstory behind that. So someone in this cohort must get a U. And when you use an algorithm, it's very good at dealing with averages, but it's not very good at dealing with individuals. And I think probably I would have if I was Education Secretary, I would have accepted that the year 13 school leavers had a tough time already. You know, they'd had the last term of their school blown up. They didn't have a chance to show how good they were in exams. They didn't have a chance, to be fair, to enjoy the kind of traditions and rites of passage that go with leaving school. And I think the least we could have done is to give them the centre assessed grades and say, this is what your teacher's best judgment based on their knowledge of you, they would have got. And you're right, it did inflate grades, and everyone kind of knew that. And there's kind of obvious and logical reasons why the grades might have been inflated. But I think probably they should have done that from the starting point.
And one other element, which is directly relevant to Kingswood, and I assume Truro, is that the algorithm approach on the whole also tended to enshrine prior achievement. And you've cited perhaps a less positive one with the individual you mentioned, or the case you mentioned rather. But on the whole, independent schools were effectively at least punching on there, if not above their weight, whereas some state schools were under because it looked back at prior patterns, and prior patterns, if they weren't good previously, they were somehow deemed ineluctably to be not good now. I just wondered if there was an element of your thinking that said, well, actually, we'll sort of take this. We're not going to lobby against this because it did largely work for the independent sector better than it worked for the state sector. Yeah,
I mean, but I think that was really because of how the algorithm worked, and because an algorithm requires a certain cohort size or class size of children to be able to apply. So it meant that the algorithm was ignored when if a school, for example, had 2 or 3 children studying Latin, which by definition is a kind of small minority subject, you can't really apply an algorithm to 3 children. So what the government algorithm did, they said, we'll put that aside, let's give those children the centre assessed grades. And I guess it is fair to say that in some of those minority subjects, could be Latin, could be German, could be history of art, where you've got small cohorts of children doing them in any class, the centre assessed grades were applied. And that meant actually there was a kind of inbuilt advantage to independent schools, which tend to be the schools which run those minority subjects more.
But tell me this, I mean, looking forward now to this academic year, what are you and your team's planning expectations of GCSEs and then A-levels in the summer of next year? Are you expecting that it will revert to the hitherto traditional approach of exams in a lecture hall or whatever, or do you think there's a prospect it might need an element of teacher assessed or centre assessed grades?
Yeah, I mean, they've given a sort of teaser about what, the DfE have given a bit of a teaser about what they're planning to do, which is to say that they will, and we should be coaching our students to expect that they will write exams in the summer of 21. The difference is that they're just discussing whether they should push those exams to be slightly later to give schools a greater contact time in the classroom between now and then to get through the specifications. What they've also done, subject by subject, is they've had a look at the syllabuses and worked out whether they need to be trimmed in a way that allows the teachers to get through the work that they need to get through in time. So we're anticipating that our students will write exams, but we don't know when. So.
Right. I mean, you and everyone faces that exact issue. I guess it's far enough away at this stage, it may not materially affect, but it's going to get soon and prominent. I want to come back to a point about the rites of passage, that I think all of us who can remember what it was like at 18 or perhaps 16 to leave school remembers that as a emotional, wonderful pivot, to use that overused word, time in people's lives. This year, your students, whether Truro or in sort of inherited students at Kingswood, have not had that. What has Kingswood attempted to do to, if not replicate, but recognise that loss of rites of passage, that moment of moving from, dare I say, from childhood to the beginnings of adulthood?
I think there's talk about whether there might be an opportunity sometime around the Christmas holidays to get the years 13 leavers back to school if they're back in Bath and all the surrounds for their university holidays. There's talk about whether there might be an opportunity for them to gather because they never got to do that in the summer term. It's one of the difficulties I think about running any institution right now in this time is you just have to be reactive. We're responding at all times to kind of the changes in news flow. And a good example is we're meant to have our first sports fixture this coming Saturday against another local school. And we plan to have the first three or so weeks of internal competition, internal sport within our schools, and then to get out as a kind of sensibly risk-assessed local fixture between schools. And I've got a discussion with the headmaster of a local school later today. Given the mood music, the point you made, Greg, about the stats in Bath and Northeast Somerset are really low, but the mood music very much is about, look, the national picture's not looking good. Be careful about how you venture out. So, going back to your original question, if there are opportunities to get school leavers together safely, we'll be all ears for that. But we'll have to play it one day at a time, I think.
Yeah, and it's all going to be, we're all living a life on a pause. Everything is contingent. If anything, it's even more contingent right now than it was 2-3 weeks back. The idea of, I don't know, what it might be, 200-300 pupil or students getting together in December. Hard to say at the moment, isn't it? It's virtually, well, it's impossible. We do not know, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I guess the bottom line is it's just a very difficult time, and I guess it wasn't only the school leavers, but anyone who was in a situation where they were transitioning from one part of their lives to another has suffered, if you like, a kind of they've been grieving. Same for university graduates who might have got to the end of their time at uni and had to forego their graduation ceremony and so on. So I think it's been difficult for a lot of people.
Many. Let's come on to if not the positives, but the differences. So I'd like to talk, like you to talk about, in this great pause period, but what have been the learnings for schools. And I want to particularly focus initially on the learning from home, or distance learning, however defined, how that has worked, and then how it may work if there may be further restrictions. So talk about the role of the school in helping parents teach at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's been such a fascinating kind of national experiment, if you like, that was inconceivable in normal times. And I think what's happened in education, and it's probably applicable in other industries, but it's kind of forced an acceleration of trends that were already happening, but and I think forced for the good, actually. And my experience, and I think in both Truro and indeed Kingswood, was that teachers talking about teaching and learning and children making progress, that sort of level of discussion was kind of off the scale in terms of what we would have had in normal times. And I think Kingswood moved quite quickly after lockdown into delivering lessons using Microsoft Teams and a combination of Teams and Firefly, which is their kind of virtual learning portal. And so teachers had to very quickly kind of master the art of thinking about, how do I deliver this lesson where I'm sitting at home and my class is sitting behind a screen in front of, in the comfort of their own living room, How do I deliver a lesson in a way that I know these children are making progress? And that forces, I think, you to be very, very intentional and careful about your lesson planning. And I think, so I think a lot of positive stuff's come out of that, actually, because I think what Kingswood teachers found is that when kids broke for the summer holidays officially, the general feeling was, well, do you know what, these children have very largely made at least as much progress as they would have done in normal time. They've cracked on in a remote learning environment, which has been very positive. So there's been lots of positive lessons to learn. I think now that we've come back into September and the start of term, one of the things we're making sure we capitalize on, and I've set up this, what we're calling our digital acceleration group at school, which is meeting already, but is to how do we hold on to the lessons that were really good in lockdown and keep going with them. And what's happening right now, in fact, at Kingswood is pretty much every lesson that's being taught by the teacher to the class in front of them is also being recorded so that it can be streamed live to kids who might not be at school. So we maybe have a dozen borders from countries around the world where the travel corridor hasn't yet opened up. And those borders are actually dialing in, if you like, and watching the lessons live. And we've got children at home who might, whose family member might have symptoms, who therefore are in self-isolation, and they're getting taught as well. So that's an amazing thing. If you said to me, 6 months ago, in 6 months' time, your teachers will be teaching the class in front of them, and in some sort of blended approach, teaching children who are not in the classroom, I wouldn't have believed you. And
it's one of the many paradoxes of this pandemic that the great pause has also been the great accelerator. And we've been highlighting some of those elements with Bath Life, both in terms of our emails and social media, but also in the magazine as well, that societal changes, the jump cut is happening faster, such as working from home, which is in a sense broadly paralleling an element you've just talked about there. You mentioned also about recording and live streaming. I perhaps should have mentioned earlier, this event is being recorded and will be on YouTube, so let's please share it subsequently. I just want to break, if I may. Chris Whitty is giving a briefing right at the moment, and I've got a note here saying that the same social distancing guidelines will apply as now. The argument is that progress is being made on vaccines, and it's possible one could be available in small amounts for certain groups by the end of the year, and much more likely in the early stage of the second year next year. And the other is that the point being made is that good news is that treatment is getting better to help cut fatalities. So as of right now, we're maybe not quite going into what many may have feared, but as we've said, it's very contingent. I want to come back to the remote learning and best practices and so on. We'll come back to borders in a moment. I just wonder if there's an extra role for Kingswood and the other independent schools in Bath to help provide support, best practice, ideas and so on for other schools which may not have, well, they don't have the same resources that Kingswood has. Is there a civic responsibility, the independent sector, to help the state sector more so than ever?
Yeah, 100%, Greg. And actually, I think it's a two-way thing. I don't think we're the only ones who can do the helping. I'm really looking forward to building a relationship in Bath with both the other independent and maintained sector and academy heads. I had a terrific relationship in Cornwall that I built up over the years between the independent and state sector for huge kind of mutual benefits. We are a charity. We have charitable status. We have an obligation to make sure that we're generous in our approach to public benefit. And I know that at Kingswood we have someone who is in charge of local partnerships. So, as the new boy in town, I've been at school for less than a month. I'm looking forward to kind of getting under the skin of those. But I've got no doubt in my mind that I would like Kingswood to be celebrated as a generous and responsible member of the local community. And if that could mean sharing our facilities, which we have in abundance, which we're blessed to be up here on the Lansdowne with all this lovely space. But sharing our facilities, but equally in this kind of tech advanced world, there would be nothing to stop us saying, well, if there are minority subjects that we offer that someone else doesn't, what's to stop children who are not at Kingswood benefiting from that? So I'd be very open to having those sorts of discussions. And I wrote a letter, in fact, just last week, I've written to introduce myself to the state school secondary heads to say, look, when we're allowed to come and have lunch and look around Kingswood, and I'd love to come and look around your school and hope to get those relationships off to a good start.
I'm absolutely sure you're right to stress that mutuality. It isn't only one way or whatever. There is that old phrase that we are all in this together, and if there are ways of sharing any forms of best practice, insights, value, or use of facilities, whatever it might be, I'm absolutely certain that each side, almost a contradiction in terms, that each side will be pushing at an open door. Hold the thought of that metaphor for a moment. I'd like to bring in at this point Lucy Beattie from Three Ways School. She is making the very fair point. Many families do not have the resources, the personal domestic resources that students at Kingswood have. So making that type of education almost impossible, the working from home, being taught at home. Maybe no Wi-Fi, maybe just one screen between parents and children, and a lack of education simply about how to access it. Yeah. It's hard. I'm not asking specifically to respond to that, but what can be done more to help people who lack those resources at home access them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And, talking to, I had, in my old place, I had a kind of regular meeting with all the chief executives of Cornwall academies. And we kind of, we were having these discussions. And I was aware that, if you like, as the independent school head, where almost by definition, well, not by definition, but not in all cases, our parents had the means to say, well, we are going to be at home during lockdown, and our children might have a laptop, and we probably do have Wi-Fi, and the same can't be said for everywhere. And I know that when I kind of observed the lengths that the maintain sector were going to say, how do we crack this? And in many cases, certainly within a Cornwall setting, some of the state schools were using Teams where they could to families that had the means to have that kind of tech at home, and were making other plans to actually get hard copy material around the area to their families, so the children could continue to make progress. So it was kind of almost doubly difficult for them, because they were having to consider, let's reach out to our children where we can to see that that all is well at home, and pastorally, I think, important. But at the same time saying, well, we can't, that's not a given. And we're having to get kind of hard copy packs of material out to homes for children to work on. And so, not easy.
I'm sure the ingenuity, but also the sort of the wellspring of thoughtfulness, the desire to help where possible, those two elements, I suspect, will help address, but not wholly, the issues of the sort of digital deficit, I think it's been called, where families, individuals simply can't access information. We'll perhaps return to that in a moment. I want to ask you, when you thought about the role at Kingswood, and it's a Wesleyan school, and the values of John Wesley are, if not daily, but regularly repeated through the school. Wondered did you feel that those Wesleyan values are actually more relevant now in these times than previously?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that has happened in British society over lockdown is, I think, broadly, people at a community level have realized that actually we care about each other, that we've all gone out and kind of banged a pot for the NHS, and we've established kind of neighborhood WhatsApp groups to go shopping for the elderly. And I think that Wesleyan notion of do all the good you can by all the means you can is, I think I've been really impressed with the way at a community level people have responded. And yeah, the government's, I guess, quite rightly coming for some stick with the way they've handled some of these crises and the kind of U-turns and flip-flops they've made. But I think, so at the same time, we've quite rightly maybe been critical of picking them up for those faults. But at a local level, I think it's emphasized the importance of community. And I think that's very much a kind of Wesleyan value. Which is, and certainly something which attracted me to Kingswood School in the first place.
This point isn't meant to sound competitive as such, I promise. But I wonder if this period prompts Kingswood as an organisation to think that it both wishes to and should be more connected with the local community in Bath than hitherto. That's not a criticism, because Kingswood, like many independent schools, has always been very aware of its civic responsibility. I'm more thinking, is there an extra need now than previously?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I grew up in South Africa. I'm a kind of child of apartheid. I went to a state school in Johannesburg as a boy, and so and I happen to now be the headmaster of an independent school. But for me, schools have a whole lot more in common than what divides them, and I don't kind of buy into a sort of ideological divide about state versus independent. I think we've got a lot to learn from each other, and as I said, as the new kid in town, I'm still trying to figure out what I think. I'm going through a process, if you like, of forming a view on all the things that Kingswood does, all aspects of what it does, both as a school, but as a kind of civically minded organization. So I haven't really got a kind of useful insight to offer this forum about whether we do enough or not, because I don't yet know what we do. I'm learning, but I'm sure you're right that I'm a kind of naturally outward-looking individual, and the worst thing for me would be for Kingswood to be this kind of privileged place up on the hill, looking down on the city below. I just don't. That's not what we are. And so I'll be sort of anything we can do as a school to kind of reach out and be useful in the local community. We'd be up for.
Yeah. Well, I think that's covered very clearly. I'll give you a little prep that I'll be asking you a question later on to say, pitch us as to why, to the parents watching, why they might consider putting their lovely daughters and sons into Kingswood. So have a think about that. But I want to talk in this next section about essentially Kingswood as a business. I mean, of course, it is constructed as a charity. Of course, its primary role is pedagogical, but it does and has to operate commercially, because that is how it's structured. So I want to come on to that as an area. How, for example, and this is being sort of completely stand back about it, in a period where the school couldn't, like all other schools, couldn't operate to the extent it has done, the pressure for any form of discounting from parents?
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough. The summer term was really tough for all independent schools, because and look, again, this is not an independent versus state, but obviously with fee-paying parents, it was even more acute, the fact that you send your children home and you still need to charge your parents fees so that you can keep your school alive and pay your staff salaries. It kind of focuses the mind, and schools like Kingswood aren't wealthy schools. We don't have a big endowment to fall back on. And yet the truth of the matter is that children being at home, educated via a computer, it's not a patch on the real thing. The kind of breadth and balance of a school education where you're actually on site is an altogether different offering. So I think it was important to just acknowledge that, to say, look, this isn't great, but what we're going to try and do is the next best thing. And what we're also going to try and do is kind of eke out savings that we can then pass on to parents by way of a kind of rebate on the school fees. And I must say, to that end, the government's furlough scheme was really helpful, because those savings that schools were able to make, they were able to pass on to parents, and many of whom were in businesses that were themselves struggling.
And just to that point, parents may not, or not all parents may have been able to afford the fees of Kingswood and other independent schools. Is it something you've experienced from a business perspective, that there's been an actual drop-off in parents, or have the numbers broadly maintained this year compared with last?
This is an interesting question, Greg. And what's actually happened is that the levels of demand we're seeing for places at Kingswood have gone crazy, and we've got record pupil numbers at the school right now, and there's been a kind of spike in interest and demand for places that we just simply didn't anticipate at all. And I've been trying to kind of put my finger on that. And I think there's some things going on there in the market. I mean, I think one of the things that's going on is that people are moving out of London and the southeast and saying, well, we've proved to our employers that we can work from home, we can work remotely, we can be just as good as our job. Do we need to be based in London to do that? No, we don't. Let's move out. And I think the whole of the southwest, I think, is probably benefiting, and probably other areas of the country as well. And that's probably a good thing, actually, because it's kind of driving growth and driving economic benefits out of London. And I think certainly independent schools are benefiting from that. And I think, I spoke a bit about that kind of tension between what independent schools had the resources to and were able to provide, and what some of the state schools that were dependent on government funding were able to provide. And I think partly we've seen parents making a decision to say, actually, we're worried if our child, if there's another lockdown and our child is forced to be at home and there isn't much interaction, we're worried about their education and them falling behind. And I think a school like Kingswood, who's perhaps had the resources to be able to deal with that, has been attractive. And that's a big debate, isn't it? Because it's speaking about the kind of divide between independent and state in terms of resources, which is a thorny topic.
Yeah, we'll come on to a couple of points about resources. So I'll be bringing in Peter Blake from CMS shortly. But if Annie is on the call, if we could bring forward Simon Ware of Shift Active Media. Simon, I hope you're on the call. You've got an interesting question. And Simon, you're speaking as a Kingswood parent, I believe, as well.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Hi, Greg.
Hey.
Welcome to Bath and welcome to Kingswood, Andrew. I've one question really, which actually connects very well with what Greg was just asking about, which is, as independent schools seem under a great deal of pressure to perform financially in these sort of difficult modern times, and perhaps, parents are possibly even more demanding than ever, most businesses in these circumstances would conduct regular surveys to make sure they're in tune with their customers, and customers in this case being parents, and customers perhaps even being children. Is there actually merit in conducting some regular surveys for both parents and children to really, manage the sort of difficult circumstances that we're in today?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. Simon. In fact, I had a governor's meeting on Friday, and the very topic of parental survey came up. As the new head, tasked by my governors to take a fresh look at Kingswood and all that it offers, and to try and kind of map out a set of priorities. It's kind of very obvious to me, and indeed to the governors, that the people to ask, in addition to your staff, but the people to ask are your parents and your students. And so, very definitely we're going to be making use of surveys, in the coming months to try and get a sense of what the priority is of our fee-paying parents, and indeed the children, because the children have got most to gain or lose depending on the quality and nature of their experience at school. And I think it's really important that we ask them. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. You know, it's just, is there a chance for perhaps even some small working groups or something? So take the technology challenges that Kingswood faces at the moment, and if we do go into lockdown again, I'm sure there are a number of people, parents of students at Kingswood who work in the technology sector that may be able to support and advise.
Such as yourself, up to a point, presumably, with all your.
I would, yes.
I don't want to bounce you live, Simon, but you know, come on, step up, man.
Yeah.
maybe just briefly say what your business is. Very successful Bath-based business.
Yeah, so we run a digital sports business and partner with Google and Facebook and employ about 270 people in Bath. So yeah, we have a lot of digital services and experience that, you know, I would offer if it's useful.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And that's, Simon, that is kind of you. I mean, as I said, we've just set up this digital acceleration group at Kingswood. We had our first meeting last week, chaired by our IT director. And one of the discussions was, we need to get the right people in the room for this, to make the most of the opportunity in terms of kind of mapping out what sort of fast track investment we think we need to be making in digital infrastructure. But you're right, I think it would be really useful for us to be able to kind of draw on industry expertise that's wider than just what exists in school.
Yeah,
very good point. Simon, thank you very much. Good contribution. Thank you. I'm going to bring in, if he is there, from CMS, Peter Blake, who's got a question about the assets and the sort of midterm planning, perhaps, of Kingswood. Or not. Well, there he is. Hello, Peter.
I think Peter's there.
We have one of these Zoom pauses, which gives every host a slight frisson. Hey, how are you doing?
Peter, you're on mute.
Yes, you are.
I'm mute, there we go.
Yeah, good man.
Thank you, Greg, and morning to you, Andrew. Yeah, I'm just adapting my question slightly and just picking up on your background in equity, and you've already talked about, you know, the remote learning and wanting to maintain that for the foreseeable future, you know, beyond COVID. And also you've talked about the importance of your facilities and sharing those facilities, coupled with the fact you're already saying that you've got increased pupil numbers. So what my question is about mainly is, from a construction consultancy background, is from a financial aspect, one of your biggest assets the school has is its buildings and its land. And there are lots of discussions at the moment in all aspects of business and property about maintaining existing building stocks, but also having to introduce some flexibility and the repurposing of that existing building stock. So my specific question is, what are your views on balancing and maintaining the existing building versus new developments to maintain pupil parent interest and attraction to the school?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, Peter. I think, you know, if you look at the Kingswood site, it won't take you long to figure out that the kind of annual maintenance budget just to keep your existing stock of assets in good nick is pretty considerable, and that if you kind of neglect that at your peril. And I know over the last 2 or 3 years, Kingswood's they've had a couple of incidences where they had very expensive, non-expected items where kind of ceilings have proved to be vulnerable. So, and the truth as well, when you're trying to run the business of Kingswood, is that it's quite hard, and I don't think Kingswood is alone in this, but it's difficult for schools, independent schools, to deliver on an ambitious strategic plan on school fee income alone. And so Kingswood has got quite a kind of thriving Kingswood Enterprises division, which looks to kind of sweat the school's assets through summer residentials, through all sorts of kind of commercial activity that's designed to make a profit, if you like. And that profit is basically 100% contributed to the school to help us to deliver our kind of strategic objectives. And so there's an element of needing our enterprise business to be profitable, to support what we're doing. The other thing is that independent schools, I suppose, historically have been in a bit of a kind of arms race against one another, and you know, a new sports hall here and a new music school there and a new boarding house. And you know, my sense is that those kind of days are, you know, there's a lot of belt tightening going on, and that any capital projects that we invest in now, one of the kind of criteria are going to be, well, is there an opportunity for that capital project to actually generate a return that it wouldn't have otherwise? In other words, it's just not a replacement cycle, but you're building and investing in something that's going to generate additional income. So we're trying to kind of get the balance right on that.
And I'm sure COVID has had quite an impact upon that. You know, in the last summer, there are a lot of an income stream that's available for the use of those buildings during the summer periods, which I guess you've not had the benefit of this year.
No, I mean that's been brutal, actually. If I'm honest, the summer term at school was hard because, you know, obviously we passed on as much of a kind of cost saving as we could to parents by way of fee rebates. But actually, one of the biggest impact was that all of our business, which over that summer term and summer holidays, just disappeared.
Yeah. And then to that point, to Peter's point, more generally about fundraising and commercial activities. The summer has gone, so, you know, summer weddings at Kingswood or parties, whatever else it might be, residential schools, no. But how is the autumn looking in terms of fundraising as opposed to sweating the assets?
Well, you know, we've got a development office whose job it is, first and foremost, I suppose, is to reach out to Kingswood alumni and other people interested in the development and future of Kingswood. We've got a very kind of rich not in financial terms, but rich in terms of kind of value to the school community of boys and girls who've been to Truro School over the centuries, really. But one of the things that comes with that is if you look after your alumni in terms of keeping them entertained with great communication and reunion events, is you do raise money on the back of that through legacies. And I think Kingswood's been reasonably successful in trying to focus on its bursary campaign. It's got a 10-for-1 bursary campaign, which is really what we're trying to do, is to say, one of the values that's kind of central to Methodism, I think, is to be inclusive. And yet fee-paying schools, by definition, you could argue, aren't inclusive because you're kind of rationing by people's ability to pay. So what we've tried to do is raise bursary funding, which has enabled us to say, well, we can take children into school who benefit from a Kingswood education, whose parents simply couldn't otherwise afford the fees. And our alumni are very, and in fact, that's been the focus of our fundraising over recent years, is trying to raise bursaries rather than trying to raise money to build the next new shiny building.
Okay, Peter, thank you for your questions and observations, and good luck yourself with CMS, of course, in these times. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. On the fundraising point, I'd also like to bring in Stephanie Massey, both from a Mentoring Plus involvement, but also Bath Festivals, who's got a point about the effect, if Stephanie is there, which I'm sure she will be, about the arts and thereby learning during lockdown. If I go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, she will appear like magic, or indeed not. Whilst we're waiting for Stephanie, let's just come on to, oh, there she is, lovely.
As if by magic, here we go.
I know. Yeah. Stephanie, good morning.
Hi, Greg.
How are you doing?
Hello, Andrew. Good, thank you. How are you doing? Nice to see you.
Well, so good so far. So you've got a question about the arts particularly, because I know Kingswood have contributed to Bath Festivals.
Yeah, hi Andrew. Well, firstly, I wanted to say we're delighted that Kingswood is supporting BAFF festivals, and particularly we've got an upcoming digital children's festival, Reading is Magic, and you're supporting that, which enables us to take this festival into other schools for free, which is an amazing resource. What my question is about the arts is, what impact do you feel that learnings from lockdown, thinking particularly of mental health issues, should have on the importance of arts on children's education and well-being going forwards?
Stephanie, ask that question again so I can be sure that I understand what you're asking me.
So really, what do you think we've learned from lockdown about the importance of arts on children's well-being, or in fact all of our well-being, and how do you think going forward we should think about that in terms of education, the importance of art in education?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges, Stephanie, in lockdown was in trying to deliver meaningful, creative and performing arts curriculum to children. And the kind of level of innovation and ingenuity was quite sort of astounding that some schools managed to achieve. In terms of, one of the things we did at Truro, which was just remarkable actually, was the kind of the director of music managed to put together the school chamber choir. I mean, I guess there were 20 people. He was conducting them from his living room, and they were in their living rooms all over Cornwall, and they were singing in harmony as he conducted them. And then this was broadcast, and there was a lovely example of what can be achieved. I mean, my fundamental view, and Stephanie, at the heart of your question, is that education is about balance, and it's about developing whole people, mind, body, and spirit, and which also means developing all the kind of creative dimensions of what it means to be human, and a lot of those things happen together because people feed off each other and get creative energy from one another. And I think one of the lessons from lockdown was that children suffered from a lack of balance. And, we quickly found ourselves in my old setting at saying, we're going to stop doing homework because these kids are having X hours a day in front of a screen. They don't need Y hours in the evening to be doing their homework. And we kind of pulled back on that. And we organized what we call the kind of quarantine challenge, which was designed specifically to kind of to get them to be creative. So competitions between houses to draw funny pictures. I think there was one where they would send a few pictures of me and said, you've got to come up with a self-portrait, with a portrait of the headmaster, which was interesting. But yeah, I think one of the lessons we've learned, Stephanie, and the issue, dealing with some of the mental health fallout from lockdown is more so than ever, is giving our children that opportunity to have a balance, and not just, it's not just about kind of learning curriculum in front of a screen. And yeah, hopefully we responded, and that's why it's so nice for the kids to be back at school right now.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question. Thank you. We're a bit out of time. I would just like to make a slightly broader point for everyone watching this about the arts as a whole. The arts are so important for us to explore, explain, and discover what it is to be human. So all of us, to retain that creative zeal and that interpretation that the arts will give us in whichever dimension. Andrew, I mentioned earlier, I gave you about a 10-minute warning or something. I would like you to give us if not a pitch, if that's perhaps a bit over, but an explanation. If I were, which in a previous life I was, a potential Kingswood parent, why should we consider putting a son or a daughter through Kingswood?
Yeah, I mean, thank you that's a lovely question for me to answer, and hopefully in answering a bit of Stephanie's question, you'll have got a sense of the importance that I attach to a kind of broad and balanced education. My fundamental view is actually, if you choose to send your child to a school like Kingswood, it's a big decision because it's obviously, it's a big investment from one perspective, but actually it's unlike any other transaction you'll ever make. Because I think at Kingswood, and I'm finding this out in a really palpable way, you're buying into a community, you're buying into an ethos, you're buying into a set of values which has kindness at its heart. And you're buying into a place where the teachers genuinely believe that their role and responsibility is to educate the whole person in a mind, body, and spirit. And they go about their business with that in mind. And yes, we do, we get great results and we've got great facilities, but actually so do other schools. And for me, it's the ethos, the values, those kind of Wesleyan, that Wesleyan core that I think makes Kingswood a special place.
Well, I think it's a very lovely point to end on. You mentioned at an earlier point about Wesleyan values. If anything, they've become more sort of germane to society as a whole. We have certainly attempted to play our part through Bath Life with our campaign, #BathTogether, precisely to celebrate the good that people do. For your time this morning, Andrew, the new head of Kingswood, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy your time in Bath. I'm sure you will when you are fully able to be out and part of it and so on. And of course, your time at Kingswood, picking up the mantle from Simon Morris. And we very much look forward to meeting you soon, whenever that may be. Thank you today to everyone for your attendance. As mentioned, I think it's our busiest yet. It'll be posted on YouTube shortly. Please pass it on because there's been some really fascinating observations and insights here. Talk to us, of course, about future Bath Life business surgeries and Bath Life Presents. We can help showcase great thinking. That's the idea. Look out for our next business surgery on October 21st with interaction about office design. After this great pause, the role of offices is changing quite sharply, of course. Anyway, we're finishing. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been our very first Bath Life Presents. Thank you, and thank you, Kingswood. Bath together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.